Video 1, probably take 5. Question 1.
Okay, welcome to part 1 of a series of videos that Lauren and I have called Across the Spectrum, and they came about because on my Australian sexologist page I happened to mention that this year we discovered that Lauren was autistic, and both of us realized there wasn't a lot of information out there. And also on top of that, I've just been getting lots of questions, so I put it out there with a question box, and these videos are results of how many questions we got, which were amazing and awesome. So we're looking forward to giving you the answers to those questions, and thank you for them.
Caveat that we are not experts in autism. Obviously, this is our autism journey as a neurotypical and a neurodiverse. So thank you. ND being neurodiverse and NT being neurotypical, just acronyms allocated to those words. And I'm obviously ND, neurodiverse, and Naomi is NT, neurotypical.
Yeah, so I'll probably say that was because of myself. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the whole time that we've been together, which is at the moment now over 2 years, but right from the get-go, there were some things that I couldn't quite explain, and something felt a bit, kind of like something was missing, or we were missing each other in some ways of the communication. And to be honest, on different planets. Yeah, that's exactly what we would say sometimes. And for some of you who know, I am a clinical sexologist, so I spend a lot of time with couples, and I had noticed it as well with some of my couples. But yeah, I think I just kind of started researching and wasn't sure. And Lauren has quite a traumatic childhood background, so I often wondered if it was that. Well, both of us did, and we even had talked about Lauren having some EMDR, which is an acronym. Have a look at for that. You can just Google it, but it's specifically for trauma. And even that wasn't really still giving us the answers. So one day, I can't remember, I don't know, we may have been watching Hannah Gatsby, her second video that was on Netflix.
The one with the dog.
The one with the dog. And I think she made a comment on there or something, and I'd actually been thinking a little bit before that, I wonder if Lauren's autistic, because I think I personally, yes, whilst I'd done a lot of work in the field of disability and sexuality education, I didn't really know how huge the autism spectrum was. So I think when I watched Hannah talk a little bit about her recent diagnosis, I think almost at the same age as you. Anyway, so one day we did that, and I actually Googled some of the tests, and Lauren did them, and just, immediately you were just like, oh, that's me, weren't you? You just kind of, there were tests, and we were kind of questions, there are a whole bunch of them, and then there's an actual autism quotient test that's on, what's his name? It's the Baron Cohen guy from the UK.
You can put links in.
We'll put links in after, but his test, and then Lauren actually scored quite high on that. And then there was a sort of empathy autism quotient test as well, and I scored really high on one end with high empathy, and Lauren was on the other end. So we were kind of having lots of aha moments, and then went into a bit of a deep dive podcasts,
bit of a research hole.
Yeah, and realised there was heaps of stuff missing, but one thing that we kept seeing was, and again, this is sort of gendered language, but we were definitely seeing that folks who identify as women were missed a lot, especially for the folks who were on the autism spectrum and didn't have any, say, intellectual disabilities. In fact, often what we were finding, folks like Lauren are actually have quite high IQs, and in very jobs which use a lot of brain power, and that kind of stuff. And I think that's how they often say that they're missed, and they get anxiety diagnosis. I've heard also some of my clients who I've since talked to about this bipolar disorder diagnosis. There's a whole bunch there, and of course you can't divorce this stuff from gender stereotypes and things, because a lot of what I'm hearing and what we're both reading is that there's a lot of stuff geared towards men. And I suppose there's, patriarchal stuff and, gendered roles that are all tied in. It's hard to kind of, unpack it all, but everything you saw, you were just like, yeah.
Absolutely. It was sort of just a whole lot of aha moments.
Yeah. And I think we'll go on to the next question, because then in another question we talk about diagnosis and stuff, but that's how we found it.
Obviously this is a spectrum, so what I experience and what I go through could be very different to somebody else on the spectrum, just to make that clear, but I'm sure there are pretty consistent things that occur to people with autism.
So I was thinking about that conversation that we had. So one of the things I noticed right from the get-go, like Lauren had mentioned something to me very early on in our text messages about how she needs to watch people's behaviour, and made a comment about how she was unsure when she was little what to do when people cry, and she had to ask her nanny back when she was living in South Africa. And on Saturday, for example, just recently, we had a conversation and I was trying to ask Lauren about facial expressions, and that might be helpful, because I said to you about smiling, like how can I, oh that's right, because I'd organised some adventurous sort of little things to do on the weekend, and I was saying how excited I was, and then you were saying that you are not sure. Do you want to explain that?
That I can't forecast emotions, so I live in the moment, so depending on what's going on around me is essentially dictating my emotions. So thinking about something, I'm sure, like we went to go watch whales, like that is pretty exciting, right? Naomi was super, super excited about it, but sort of in my head, I knew that would be an exciting experience, but I can't feel the emotion of excitement prior to the actual event occurring. And then obviously in the moment, then I'll smile and I'll be excited in obviously my own way. Very, very different excitement. I might crack a smile.
Actually, and I was going to say, that's what I mean about, remember I said to you when you're at work, because obviously there's a lot of things we're finding out about how Lauren has been managing being autistic and, being manager of people and stuff like that. And I mentioned, you said something about smiling in the office, like even in meetings, and you said like sometimes you,
I'll obviously watch everybody's faces in the room, and then when people generally start to sequentially smile, so somebody will say something and then the smile sequence will start, and then I'll just watch for everybody smiling in the room, and then I'll crack a smile to sort of fit in with everybody. I suppose that's what they call masking. So on a daily, as an autistic person, because ideally I just love to have a pan face, not talk to anybody and stay in a dark room, but that's not the reality of life, right?
Sometimes she gets called resting bitch face, but she's actually not.
I'm actually a nice person. So yeah, it takes a lot of energy, as opposed to you'll just smile, laugh, etc. It takes a lot of energy for me to do that.
And I think we read somewhere else, it was really making sense. Someone else said, it takes me ages for my face to catch up with my feelings, or something like that. And you said you also said something like, sometimes you just want to smile and your face won't do it.
Yeah, it's sort of this weird feeling where I might be happy, or it might be a good moment, and I'd really like to smile, but it's just super hard. It sort of just really doesn't come naturally. So it's almost like I've got to have a lot of energy in order to express facial emotions, which is very strange.
And you can't see, but Lauren actually has. Do you want to show that? This is what she's been doing a lot, and we've realised these are very helpful on our journey, these fidget spinners. But do you want to say why you do that? Lauren takes them everywhere. I mean, I think folks even who aren't on the spectrum probably would be really, this would be beneficial for a lot of people. I once used it when I was anxious, but do you want to say what you use that for?
Yeah, I mean, I carry them around with me. I literally have one in the car, one in my bag, one next to the couch. I literally have them everywhere, and they're soothing. So essentially the motion and the sound of it sort of reduces anxiety levels. So I suppose another outcome of this is high levels of anxiety, because not not that I don't like people, it's just that I don't like people.
It's true. Not many of them.
And obviously, because, you know, then comes a whole nother aspect of it, which is talking to people. So again, I've got to have a sequence of questions that I have planned where I suppose a neurotypical person would just walk into a conversation and just start chatting, and, you know, whereas my brain has to work overtime to sort of go, okay, let me ask my first trigger question, and I'm just going to keep asking them questions so that they can keep talking, so I don't actually have to talk. And that generally keeps a conversation going, but it's very strenuous, and it takes a lot of energy out of me to actually keep that conversation going. So if I have somebody on the other side that is, you know, a pretty good conversationalist, then it makes my life easier. But if that other person is really difficult to talk to, it makes for a very awkward conversation, of which I'm not feeling very awkward, but I'm sure they are.
That's another one. Lauren doesn't ever, you know how hashtag awkward and that kind of thing, Lauren doesn't ever talk about feeling embarrassed or awkward. Just she'll, you know, like you mentioned, the masking, you know, things that are socially appropriate. And again, that's probably a lot of gendered stuff, particularly girls, where we're told to be people pleasers and, you know, things like that. So, but yeah, there's things that we, or myself, who is a neurotypical person, I might think things in my head, but I won't say them out loud because they're not socially acceptable. Or I might be embarrassed if I did something. Lauren just honestly doesn't get embarrassed, do you? You literally don't. No. There's nothing. She'll just, which I love, but yeah, and I think, yeah, you don't get awkward. You know that, though sometimes we giggle about it, where she'll come home and say, guess I said this today, and she'll say something that she did in a space, and other people probably look a bit shocked that she said it or go, what? But she's just like, you're not even embarrassed.
No, I suppose the penny will drop afterwards when everybody's like, oh my gosh, like you just said that. And I'm like, oh, okay. Mental notes, don't ever say that again. Probably not cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's just continuing to, and again, it goes back to that masking thing, right? Like, I just want to say whatever comes to my mind, but I've got to slow it down and take it back a few steps before I actually verbalize things, because they may not be socially acceptable to say, essentially being honest.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's other conversations we'll get into in another video around our particular communication and how this is in the romantic sense, but I think it might also be helpful. Do you want to just talk about a challenge for you? And again, being autistic and going to work, like what a day, like how, you know, talk a bit about some of the stuff that we've really noticed and what happened.
Obviously, being autistic, there's obviously a few factors. One of them being sensory. So going into an office with fluorescent lights, heaps of people, lots of chatter, lots of noise, lots of interruption, ends up being quite intense. So not only are you dealing, so you sort of walk in and you've got these extreme bright lights that essentially are affecting you indirectly, so you can feel it affecting you. And then obviously noise starts to build and starts to elevate, so that sort of adds another layer of stress. And then there's even things like I have to prepare clothes the night before to go to work because I need to feel comfortable. So it's an entire process, essentially ironing, picking out the clothes. I may have to try on a few things if I feel uncomfortable. So I may feel uncomfortable in that outfit that day, but I might not feel uncomfortable in that outfit 2 days later. It's very strange. Who knows what the parameters are, but my head has parameters. And yeah, so I need to make sure I feel comfortable when I go to work in the clothes that I'm wearing, both from a texture perspective and a fit perspective. Some days I can wear tighter clothes than others. Others I just need to wear loose clothes. Who knows why? So yeah, then when you sort of, you know, get into the office, you've got the lights going, you've got the people starting to chatter, and of course one of my super skills is hyper focus. So I can sit down.
It's her superpower.
And focus for, if somebody didn't stop me, I reckon I could go a full 24 hours.
Yeah, and she just gets up to pee and doesn't even eat. and which I, on the other hand, was watching that during ISO when this all came out, right? I really noticed it because I was like, oh, she's going to be at home and maybe I can talk to her a little more, because I know she was always very busy. But no, the same thing happened anywhere. It just doesn't matter. It's she'll just pee and barely eat. Yeah. And I was making, I, on the other hand, are like, oh, just go do the washing. I'll do this, do that. And yeah, Lauren's just like this, which is wonderful, but also, yeah, hard to be sitting next to when someone, you can't really interrupt her or anything. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I suppose essentially my brain wants to get in, do a task, and when that task is done, then I obviously will probably move on to the next one. But that's where I can probably take a little break and deviate off course. But obviously during a workday, I both have to manage people, manage jobs, manage external stakeholders, a whole bunch of factors. So it ends up meaning my hyperfocus, essentially my brain just wants to go into hyperfocus mode, but then I have the lights, I then have noise, I then have people coming in, which obviously starts to raise anxiety levels, which means I then don't eat even more because I'm anxious. I'll just drink water, I probably just drink heaps of coffee as well. But yeah, it starts to cause, by the end of the day, I'm a mess. So I come home and I'm starting to go into shutdown. So essentially, or meltdown, either or. So that's essentially my brain is going to start to switch off, and I literally cannot, a word won't come out of my mouth.
And that is actually a thing, and that's probably as our journey, one of the big things we'll talk more about them in other ways, in other videos, but basically there's two things. Lauren mostly has shutdowns more than meltdowns, but I can see it literally to the point her eyes glass over that she cannot speak, and sometimes if something's come up, but again, we've learned already we're in the journey of really working out how to make these less. But at the beginning, I couldn't understand why she wasn't able to speak, right? And if I used to say to her, I wish I could videotape you, like she was almost glassed over. A language, and again, some of my clients say this too, is like very robotic. Monotonous, and Lauren does do that. Her voice, I didn't understand either why she, talking about back to the excitement thing, she doesn't always change her voice. Like I might talk really high and then she stays like this most of the time. And
Except when I talk to dogs.
Except when you talk to dogs or older people, she just switches and has a thing for animals. I mean, who's your best buddy? It does go into high, it changes, But she shuts down, and so we'll go into it later about how we do that. But that's, I think, important to note that, especially because at first Lauren obviously is like, now she's telling people about this, but folks don't know this, that she's on top of just in a very stressful job, in a very stressful industry. She also is, she lives with autism, that's her brain. And so she's trying to deal with all that even before she leaves to go to the office. So it's pretty huge, So that's a big challenge. And so then she's pretty much shut down mode when she gets home, because her bandwidth. That's one of the things she says is like, I've got no bandwidth, which makes sense. It's like a computer shutting down. Yeah,
essentially. Obviously, not obviously, but assumingly, if I'd gotten a diagnosis as a child, that would have given me a whole bunch of tools to actually navigate life as an autistic person. But I suppose better now than never. I suppose what it facilitated was, I would remember always thinking, clearly I'm not normal, because everybody wants to go to parties and everybody wants to stand around and talk to everybody and have just general conversation, and I'm like, what's the point? I'd prefer to go home and play with my computer or my dog or anything other than hanging out with people. So I suppose, it probably would have provided more insights a little bit earlier, as opposed to me feeling not normal. And then I suppose that's where the masking came in. So you sort of start to mask harder, because it's like, okay, well, clearly I'm not normal, so clearly I just need to make more of an effort. Maybe I'm just an introvert. So you're just coming up with all these reasons as to why I may not like things that sort of normal people like to do. But I suppose it would have provided me with some tools and tactics to go into adulthood and be able to deal with things a lot easier than obviously learning a lot later in life.
Yeah. I think, you've had lots, and I've been listening to Lauren quite a lot, just go, the more she's, the more we're reading and sending each other a lot of like podcasts and articles and stuff, which is like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. I feel like there's lots. For me, just being someone who lived with Lauren, and I think that's a very common way people find this stuff out, is a partner. They get into a relationship, and so it's very hard to mask. Obviously 24/7, at some point they're going to, again, I say drop the ball, I just mean they're not going to be able to do it all the time. So this other person's who they're with, if they're in a relationship with two people or family members, because I'm hearing lots about people who have children, and then their children get a diagnosis, and then one or maybe both of the parents are like, oh, I think that's me too. I think it's been helpful just to understand the stuff where sometimes we felt like we were on different planets, but you're constantly having that stuff and working out ways to manage that, which I think we're doing really well.
Yeah, I think, revelations pop up as, the further you dig into what autism looks like across the spectrum, then you start to have those aha moments and go, oh, okay, like, cool. So I am normal in my own right, and those things are parts of me and what I need to manage navigating, I suppose, a neurotypical world. Yeah,
and like for an example, so we've started some couples counselling to help us. I'll talk again about that further on in another video, but one of the things really early on, she made a comment about, because Lauren mentioned possibly having OCD, and then the therapist, who's very much used to working with folks where either everyone's on the spectrum or one is, and she said, actually, Lauren, you probably don't, this is more your autism. And once we unpacked it, we realised it was the stuff she was doing was about her sensory things, so it wasn't really about the way often OCD presents itself. But you didn't have a name for it, I didn't have a name for it, so we realised, that's what that was about, or why you do those things.
Essentially an example of that is, obviously I do like to vacuum, or to not seem as if I'd vacuum every day, but I don't want to seem crazy. So like I'll always wear thongs or flip-flops or jandals, whichever you call them, because I don't like the feeling of dust and dirt on the floor. So I persistently want to vacuum, but I've put that to bed now. So I just wear my thongs, flip-flops, jandals around the house, essentially. Or like the sink. I know Naomi's going to laugh about the sink, because I profusely clean the sink, but I also don't want to touch anything in there that's going to then either make my hands dirty, oily, and then that's going to just be a sensory overload for me.
So we have a really clean sink. And when we got we ended up getting a cleaner to try to make life a bit easier. We're very privileged in that we can do that. But the first thing Lauren texted me was, have you seen how she's cleaned the sink? We were like, we love you. Yeah. So that's kind of some of the ways that it's been helpful, right? Knowing this about yourself now. It's only really been like the beginning of the year, really.
Yeah, because I suppose the other thing is sort of like, well, if I have OCD, then I should be, fulfilling all of these other things. I should be reorganising the cupboards. I should be doing, I'm assuming a multitude of other things that happen with OCD, but I obviously don't do those. Mine are just purely related around sensory. So I don't want to get dirty, or I don't want to get things on my hands, or I don't want to touch anything that's going to make me feel uncomfortable.
So somebody used the word levels, like with Lauren's diagnosis, around what levels and how this level of ASD and how this impacts her functioning. And I just want to say, I think we really, it's important to say that yes, it's a spectrum, and I think there's a lot of change now. Like we know that most people aren't using the word Asperger's, which again was the high functioning person, and I know that for a lot of people, including Lauren, saying that she's high functioning it may appear that way, but actually we've kind of gone through lots of the stuff that you do on a day-to-day basis just to get through. And I suppose for a lot of people, I often say to Lauren, you have an invisible disability because people don't really notice. And I think, again, Hannah Gatsby talks a bit about that too. I think she mentioned the same thing about being told she was high functioning. In fact, you know, that's very hard for, I suppose, you to hear and others, because the stuff that they have to do to get through the day is huge. So I suppose we're not really going to talk about necessarily the levels around that, because I know, again, everyone's a little different. But also, do you want to just talk about the fact that, yeah, heaps and heaps what we're reading, finding out not everybody goes and gets a formal diagnosis. Firstly, it costs like, I don't know, we're in Australia, but about $1,500. And I don't know about all other countries, but it can be a really expensive process. And I've had lots of people in my inboxes on my Australian sexologist page saying how disappointed they were with all of that. I've had a friend who recently had a diagnosis, and she's gone through the whole thing, and yes, it was expensive, but she said that her opinion was it was great because it gave her access to the NDIS, which again, this is Australian National Disability Incentive Scheme or system, so that she can get access to money that she needs to work through some stuff. So again, you know, it's okay, but even the therapist that we're seeing together, she was awesome. She was just like, well, if so we didn't, we talked about it.
Yeah, we didn't go through the full formal diagnosis. We sort of had a few consultations with someone initially. They were sort of debating whether it was trauma or whether it was autism. We sort of stopped halfway through.
I don't even think we got halfway. We went to one.
Oh yeah, we went to one. And I think it's a case of I know me best, and these things affect my day-to-day living, so I definitely don't question whether I'm actually autistic or not. I definitely know that I am, because I obviously have to navigate the world very differently to a neurotypical person. So I think whether you do formal diagnosis or self-diagnosis, and even the relationship therapist we're talking to at the moment, I remember saying to her, I actually just really appreciate her language, because I went into it going, okay, shit, we've done a self-diagnosis, we've done some tests online, we've obviously just audited our lives and just gone, okay, tick, 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 yep, this is us, this is me. And she was just amazing at going, okay, yep, and accepting that obviously I believe, and I firmly believe that I'm autistic, and it was just, I suppose for me, great verification, albeit I don't want to go through the entire process, because at the end of the day, we're privileged to both have good jobs and be financially stable, so we can afford those things. So essentially, I don't want to go onto the NDIS and, in my mind, take money away from people that probably need it a whole lot more than me, because I can still function day to day with obviously great difficulty.
Somebody asked us about person first, or what we think about person first language, and I just want to give people a definition. Basically, I'm just reading off of something here, but person first language means like a person with autism, and that aims obviously to put a person before their disability. And then the other contrasting is identity first language, so autistic person, which is what Lauren uses, and is often, a lot of people, in fact, lots of folks who I speak to in my DMs talk about that. So many autistic people actually say that reflects their belief that being autistic is like part of their identity. And so obviously that's the language Lauren uses, so of course I'm going to use that language. And to be honest, my clients and some of the folks that are in my DMs also use that. So really it's about, I suppose, asking somebody, right? But yeah, do you want that sort of, that suits you? Yeah.
I mean, I prefer it is part of me, and it essentially is who I am, and I've got to live with it on a day-to-day basis. So I essentially say I am autistic, and not that I have autism.
Yeah. And I suppose I think, it just asking folks, it's like anything, asking folks pronouns, or, like I use the word, I interchange between gay, lesbian, queer, you use gay, you know, like I mean, they are part of our identity too. But again, I suppose it's just important to ask. So I'm sure some people won't like the language that we're using, that Lauren says, you know, I'm autistic, or I say Lauren is autistic. And of course, that's okay if that's, you know, how you prefer to use language, and this is just what we're doing. So I suppose just ask, because that's going to be different everywhere and probably different in different countries. You know, language is important, but also definitely is subjective and different. Thank you for all of your amazing questions, and if you have any more, I'm happy for you to put them in my DMs on my Australian Sexologist page, or
check the bio for all of our information. And yeah, shoot us any questions.
bye.